In the 1940s and 1950s, Bobby Driscoll was one of Hollywood's brightest young stars. He was the boy who seemed to have it all: talent, charm, and a string of roles that made him one of Disney's first true child actors. He was the voice and model for Peter Pan, starred in Song of the South, Treasure Island, and even won a Juvenile Academy Award for his work. But by the 1960s, Driscoll's life had taken a tragic turn. What began as a promising career ended in arrests, addiction, and exile from the Hollywood that once celebrated him. His story is remembered today as one of the most painful examples of how fame can unravel and how the pressures of stardom can consume someone before they ever really have a chance to grow up. Bobby Driscoll was born in 1937 in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and moved with his family to California at a young age. His good looks and natural screen presence quickly caught the attention of casting agents. By the age of 9, he was appearing in films, and by 11, he was a household name. In 1949, he won the Academy Juvenile Award for his performances in So Dear to My Heart and The Window. Disney promoted him heavily, and when the studio began working on Peter Pan, Driscoll was chosen not just as the voice, but as the live-action model animators used to bring the character to life. For millions of children, he was the boy who would never grow up. But behind the scenes, Driscoll's life wasn't as perfect as it looked. Like many child actors, he faced the difficult transition from adorable boy roles to teenage and adult work. By the mid-1950s, as he grew older, Disney cut ties with him. Driscoll later said that he was dismissed because his teenage acne and changing appearance no longer fit the studio's image. The sudden rejection hit him hard. For a boy who had spent most of his life in the spotlight, the loss of fame felt like losing his identity. Without steady work, Driscoll drifted. He attended Hollywood professional school and later tried to break into theater, but the roles weren't coming. By the time he was in his late teens, he began experimenting with drugs. Like many young people in Los Angeles in the late 1950s, he was drawn into the culture of marijuana and heroin that was spreading through the city. For Driscoll, the drugs weren't just recreation. They became an escape from the disappointment of a career that had stalled before adulthood. In 1961, his struggles burst into the public eye. Driscoll was arrested in Los Angeles for drug possession, one of several arrests he would face in the early 1960s. Newspapers reported that the former Disney star had been caught with narcotics, and the story shocked readers who remembered him as Peter Pan. In court, Driscoll admitted his addiction and was sentenced to serve time in jail, followed by probation. For a brief moment, it seemed possible he might recover. Friends said he wanted to clean up, to get back into acting, but Hollywood had moved on, and the stigma of a drug arrest was difficult to overcome. Driscoll's later years were marked by attempts to rebuild, but also by relapse. He performed in community theater and tried to study art, moving to New York in the mid-1960s. There, he found some peace in Greenwich Village's artist community, painting and socializing with other struggling creatives. But his addiction followed him, and he was never able to regain his footing. The boy who had once been Disney's brightest star was now living far from Hollywood, largely forgotten by the industry that had made him famous. What makes Driscoll's story especially tragic is how young he was when it ended. In 1968, just 31 years old, he was found dead in an abandoned building in New York City. His cause of death was listed as heart failure from advanced arteriosclerosis, brought on by years of drug use. With no identification on him, he was buried in a pauper's grave. His death wasn't publicly known until later, when his mother tried to contact him and learned the truth. By then, Disney had re-released Peter Pan, and children everywhere were still hearing his voice without realizing the man behind it was gone. Bobby Driscoll's decline from Disney star to a forgotten addict isn't just a personal tragedy. It's part of a larger story about how Hollywood treated child actors in the mid-20th century. Studios celebrated them while they were cute and profitable, but offered little support once they grew up. There were no systems in place to help young stars handle the pressures of fame or the difficulties of transitioning into adult roles. For Driscoll, that lack of support left him vulnerable to addiction and despair. The 1961 drug bust that exposed his struggles was the moment when his downfall became public. In another era, with more resources, maybe he would have received treatment instead of stigma. But in the early 1960s, drug use was seen as a moral failing, not an illness. For audiences who remembered him as Peter Pan, the headlines about heroin possession felt shocking, almost impossible to reconcile with the image of the boy who once symbolized eternal youth. For Driscoll himself, the publicity only deepened the shame and isolation he already felt. Today, Driscoll is remembered both for his extraordinary early talent and for the tragedy of his later years. His performances in films like So Dear to My Heart and The Window still hold up, and his voice as Peter Pan remains iconic. But his story is also taught as a cautionary tale, an example of what can happen when young stars are given fame but not guidance, and when addiction is met with punishment instead of support. In many ways, Driscoll's life reflected the contradictions of Los Angeles itself. He was celebrated as a symbol of innocence and magic, only to be cast aside when he no longer fit the role. He experienced the heights of Hollywood glamour and the depths of its indifference. His rise and fall remind us that behind every star on the screen is a person, often facing struggles that the audience never sees. Bobby Driscoll's story endures because it's more than just the tragedy of one actor. It's a glimpse into how Hollywood has always balanced dreams with costs. His 1960s arrests, his battle with addiction, and his lonely death reveal the other side of the fantasy, the part that rarely makes it into the movies. And for those who still hear his voice in Peter Pan, it's a reminder that even the boy who never grew up couldn't escape the weight of a very real life.